Red light filled the control room before anyone had time to think. Elena Voss was halfway through her coffee when the alarm cut through the quiet of the night shift, and every screen in the deep space monitoring station flashed the same word: unknown. She dropped her cup and ran to her console. Her hands moved faster than her mind could follow, pulling up radar feeds, gravity readings, and light patterns that made no sense at first glance. Something had entered the outer edge of the solar system, past the orbit of Neptune, moving in a straight line toward Earth. It was not a comet. It was not an asteroid. It had a shape that repeated itself in a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Elena's supervisor, a tall and quiet man named Victor Hale, rushed in seconds later, still buttoning his jacket. He looked at the screen, then at her, then back at the screen again. "Tell me this is a satellite malfunction," he said. "It's not," Elena answered. "The pattern is too clean, too deliberate. Something is transmitting." For the next few hours, the station buzzed with a kind of controlled panic. Analysts from 3 continents joined the call, their tired faces glowing on split screens. Nobody wanted to say the word alien out loud, but everyone was thinking it. The object was small, no larger than a delivery truck, yet it carried a signal so powerful that it overwhelmed half of the station's receivers within minutes. Elena worked without stopping. She had spent 11 years studying deep space signals, ever since she was a graduate student, obsessed with the idea that humanity was not alone. Most of her colleagues had laughed at her back then. Now, none of them were laughing. By dawn, she had isolated a fragment of the transmission. It was not random noise. It was structured, layered, built the way a message is built when someone wants it to be understood by a mind very different from their own. She ran it through every decryption model the station had, and slowly, painfully, patterns began to emerge. Numbers first, then shapes, then something that resembled a star map. "This isn't a greeting," she whispered to herself. "This is a warning." She printed the star map and spread it across the table, tracing lines with her finger until her stomach tightened. The map showed a spreading pattern, like ink bleeding through paper, moving outward from a distant point and swallowing star systems one by one. Next to the pattern was a symbol that repeated over and over, a single mark that, once translated, meant only one thing: danger. Victor stood beside her, arms crossed, studying the same map. "If this is real," he said slowly, "then whatever is causing this has already destroyed other worlds, and it's heading in our direction." Elena nodded. Her throat felt dry. "The beacon isn't attacking us. It's trying to help us. Someone, somewhere, wanted whoever found this to be ready." Word spread quickly through the scientific community, then through governments, and within 2 days, the discovery reached the newly formed Terran Unity Assembly, the closest thing Earth had to a single global voice. Leaders who normally argued for hours over trade agreements sat in stunned silence as Elena presented her findings on a live video call. She kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she pointed to the star map. "This beacon," she explained, "was not built by humans. Its construction uses materials and design principles we don't fully understand yet, but its purpose is clear. It is a warning system, likely one of many scattered across this region of the galaxy, meant to alert developing civilizations of an approaching threat." A representative from the Eastern Assembly leaned forward. "What threat exactly?" Elena pulled up another section of decoded data, an image of a black, swirling mass consuming a cluster of stars, like darkness eating light. "We don't have a full picture yet, but based on the scale shown in this map, it has already erased at least 3 star systems, and its path, if it continues at the same rate, will eventually reach ours." Silence stretched across the call. Somewhere in a conference room in Geneva, someone finally asked the question that mattered most. "How long do we have?" Elena hesitated. "Based on the data, decades. Maybe less. But there's something else." She switched to a final image, one she had almost decided not to show, afraid it would sound impossible. It was a structure, vast and silver, orbiting a distant star, covered in lights and moving vessels. Beside it, translated text appeared in careful lettering. "Council of Governance. Seek audience. Report all findings." "There's an organized authority out there," Elena said. A council of some kind, made up of other civilizations. This beacon includes instructions on how to reach them. I believe humanity should send someone to make contact, to share what we've found, and to ask for help before it's too late. The room erupted into overlapping voices, some excited, some afraid, some simply confused. But by the end of the week, after long nights of debate, the Terran Unity Assembly reached a decision that would have seemed impossible only a month earlier. Earth would answer the beacon. Earth would reach out. They chose a diplomat named Kaylin Ruiz to lead the mission, a calm and sharp-minded woman who had spent years negotiating peace agreements between nations that once seemed impossible to unite. If anyone could speak for the whole of humanity, the Assembly believed it was her. Elena was invited to join the preparation team, translating what little she understood of the beacon's language and helping engineers study its technology. Late one evening, as she sat alone in the lab running simulations of the beacon's signal, Victor found her still awake, surrounded by empty coffee cups and scattered notes. "You should rest," he said gently. "I can't," Elena replied, not looking up. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that map, that darkness, eating through stars like it was nothing, and I keep thinking about how small we are, compared to whatever is out there." Victor sat down across from her. "Small doesn't mean powerless. You found this. You understood it before anyone else did. That has to count for something." Elena finally looked up, exhaustion written across her face, but something else too. Determination. "I just hope the ones out there understand how urgent this is, because from what I can tell, we don't have room for mistakes." Over the following weeks, engineers worked around the clock to prepare a vessel capable of reaching the coordinates hidden within the beacon's data. It was not a warship. It was barely more than a research craft fitted with borrowed technology and hopeful guesses. But it was the best humanity could build on short notice, and it represented something far greater than its size suggested. It represented a species stepping, for the first time, beyond the boundaries of its own small world. Kaylin Ruiz stood before the assembled crowd on the morning of departure, the vessel gleaming behind her under the launch lights. Cameras from every corner of the planet captured the moment, broadcasting it to billions of people who, for once, watched the same event with the same breath held in their chests. "We are not going to demand anything," Kaylin said, her voice carrying clearly through the crisp morning air. "We are going to ask for a chance to be heard. Earth has always faced its challenges alone. Today, we take our first step toward not being alone anymore." Elena watched from the crowd, gripping Victor's arm without realizing it. As the engines ignited and the vessel rose slowly into the sky, she felt a mixture of pride and fear, so strong it nearly took her breath away. She thought about the star map, about the darkness spreading across the galaxy, and about the silver structure waiting somewhere far beyond their reach. "Please," she whispered under her breath, watching the light of the departing ship shrink into the clouds. "Please let them listen." But even as those words left her lips, a small and uncomfortable thought settled in the back of her mind, one she could not quite shake. Civilizations far older and far more advanced than Earth had likely faced this same threat before, and if the darkness had already consumed 3 star systems, then somewhere out there, someone had already asked for help and had not received it in time. She did not yet know how right that fear would turn out to be. Days passed in near silence as the vessel carrying Kaylin Ruiz crossed distances that no human craft had ever traveled before. Communication delays stretched longer with every passing hour, until finally, one message reached Earth that confirmed what Elena had hoped and feared in equal measure. They had arrived. The council had granted an audience. Across the globe, people gathered around screens, waiting for news, for reassurance, for anything that might tell them whether their small, fragile planet had finally found allies among the stars. Elena stood in the monitoring station once more, her eyes fixed on the silent transmission line, waiting for the next message to arrive. She did not know it yet, but the coming meeting would test humanity's patience, its pride, and its resolve, in ways none of them were prepared for. The beacon had offered a warning. The council held the power to answer it, and somewhere in the space between hope and fear, Earth's fate now rested in the hands of a single woman standing before a room of strangers who had never once considered her world worth their attention. Back at the monitoring station, Elena refused to leave her post, even after her shift had ended twice over. Victor brought her a fresh cup of coffee she did not drink, and a blanket she did not use. He understood, in his own quiet way, that she needed to be there when the next transmission arrived, as if her presence alone could somehow steady the outcome. "You know," he said, settling into the chair beside her, "when I was a boy, my grandmother used to tell me stories about lights in the sky that watched over us. I never believed her. I thought it was just something old people said to comfort children during storms." Elena managed a tired smile. "And now? Now I think maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. Maybe there really was something out there all along. We just weren't ready to hear it." The two of them sat in silence for a while, watching the transmission line blink steadily, a small green light representing the only thread connecting their world to the unknown. Around them, the station had grown quieter, as the initial panic settled into a tense, focused patience. Analysts worked in hushed voices. Engineers reviewed the beacon's technology for anything that might strengthen Earth's next move, and somewhere above them, satellites continued tracking the slow, patient darkness that had not yet reached their solar system, but was no longer impossibly far away either. Elena thought of the star map again, the way the darkness had spread across it like ink through water, consuming everything in its path without hesitation or mercy. She thought of the silver structure orbiting a distant star, filled with beings who had built a system meant to warn others, yet who had never once reached out to Earth themselves. Why had they waited? Why had they let humanity discover the beacon on its own, rather than making contact directly? She did not have an answer yet, but she suspected, deep down, that the truth would not be a comforting one. As the hours stretched into the following day, a new message finally arrived, faint and delayed by the vast distance it had traveled. Elena's fingers trembled as she opened it, her eyes scanning the words as quickly as she could read them. It was short, formal, and carefully worded, the kind of message written by someone trying to remain calm in the face of disappointment. The audience had been granted, but the tone within the message carried a weight that made Elena's stomach sink before she even finished reading. Something in the council's response felt hollow, distant, and far too careful. It read less like an offer of help, and more like a formality, being endured out of obligation rather than genuine concern. Elena set the message down slowly and looked toward Victor, who had already guessed from her expression that the news was not what either of them had hoped for. "They granted the meeting," she said quietly, "but something tells me this is only the beginning of a much harder fight." The chamber was unlike anything Kaylin Ruiz had ever imagined, even after weeks of preparing herself for the impossible. It stretched upward in curves of pale metal and soft light, shaped less like a room and more like the inside of a shell, holding dozens of seats arranged in a wide circle. Every seat was filled with a different kind of being, some tall and thin with skin like polished stone, others compact and covered in fine feathers, still others whose forms shifted so subtly that Kaylin found it difficult to focus on them directly. At the center of it all stood a raised platform, where she now waited, alone, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. A voice echoed through the chamber, translated instantly into words she understood, though it carried a strange, layered quality, as if multiple speakers were forming a single sentence together. "Representative of the world designated Soul 3, state your purpose before this council." Kaylin straightened her shoulders and forced her voice to remain steady, even though her heart pounded against her chest. She had negotiated with hostile governments before, had faced rooms full of people who wanted her to fail, but none of it had prepared her for the sheer scale of what stood before her now. "My name is Kaylin Ruiz," she began. "I represent the people of Earth, a world that recently received a warning beacon of unknown origin. The beacon led us to your council, along with data suggesting that a destructive force, one your archives may already recognize, is advancing through this region of space. 3 star systems appear to have already been lost. Our own system now lies within its projected path." A murmur rippled through the chamber, though it was difficult to tell whether it reflected concern or simple curiosity. One of the seated figures, a tall being with deep blue skin and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of quiet weariness, leaned forward slightly. "The entity you describe is known to this council as the Void Reach," the figure said. "Its existence has been documented for generations, Its behavior has been studied. Its threat has been noted. Kalen felt a flicker of hope at those words, quickly followed by confusion. Then you're already aware of the danger, which means you understand why I've come. Earth needs guidance, resources, any knowledge you can share that might help us prepare. Another voice spoke, this one sharper, colder, belonging to a smaller figure, covered in overlapping plates that shimmered faintly under the chamber's light. Preparation requires verified status. Your world has not completed the standard evaluation period required for civilizations seeking council resources. Your request, while understandable, does not follow established protocol. Kalen blinked, momentarily caught off guard. With respect, my world is facing a threat you yourselves have already identified as dangerous enough to track for generations. I'm not asking for membership privileges. I'm asking for help before more lives are lost. The blue-skinned representative folded his long hands together. Understand, Ambassador Ruiz, this council governs relations between thousands of worlds across vast distances. Protocol exists to maintain order, to prevent premature intervention that may cause more harm than benefit. Your species is, by every measure available to us, in its early stages of development. Direct intervention in matters concerning the Void Reach requires extensive review. How extensive? Kalen asked, though something in her chest already told her she would not like the answer. Review periods for threat assessment typically require several standard cycles, the smaller figure replied, followed by formal presentation to subcommittees, verification of data authenticity, and a final vote among full council members. Your species does not currently hold full membership status, which further extends the timeline. Kalen felt the ground shift beneath her, though she remained perfectly still. Cycles. As in years? Correct. And in the meantime, Kalen said, her voice tightening despite her effort to remain composed, the Void Reach continues advancing toward my planet. Silence spread through the chamber, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, the blue-skinned figure spoke again, his tone almost gentle, though the words themselves offered no comfort at all. The Council understands your concern. However, similar warnings have been received from other developing worlds in the past. Resources are limited, and the Void Reach's pattern of movement, while destructive, has historically avoided systems that pose it no benefit. There is reasonable possibility your world may not fall within its immediate path. Kalen's hands curled into fists at her sides. Reasonable possibility is not a guarantee. My people deserve more than a guess. All worlds deserve consideration, the smaller figure said, though the words felt hollow, rehearsed, the kind of statement offered 1,000 times before to 1,000 different desperate visitors. Your request has been heard. It will be recorded. Should further evidence arise confirming direct threat to your system, the matter will be escalated accordingly. Kalen wanted to argue further, to demand more than empty procedure, but she recognized the shape of the moment closing around her, the same way a door closes slowly and permanently, no matter how hard someone pushes against it. She had come seeking allies, and had instead found an institution more concerned with preserving its own order than protecting the lives of those who depended on it. Thank you for your time, she said finally, though the words tasted bitter in her mouth. As she turned to leave the chamber, one figure remained silent throughout the entire exchange, seated near the back, mostly hidden in shadow. It was smaller than the others, with soft gray fur and wide, watchful eyes. As Kalen passed near the chamber's exit, the figure rose quietly and followed her into the corridor outside, moving with careful, deliberate steps. Ambassador Ruiz, the figure said softly, once they were alone. A moment, please. Kalen turned, cautious but curious. You didn't speak during the session. Speaking would have accomplished little, the figure replied. My name is Oren Vale, representative of a small system near the outer edge of Council territory. My own world petitioned for aid against the Void Reach 4 cycles ago. We were told much the same as you were told today. Kalen's stomach tightened. What happened to your world? Oren's wide eyes lowered slightly. We survived, though barely, and only because we abandoned 2 of our outer colonies to slow the Void Reach's advance. The Council offered sympathy after the fact. Sympathy does not rebuild lost homes. Then why are you telling me this now? Kalen asked. Because I believe you already understand what I am about to say, Oren replied. The Council will not act in time to save your world, not because it lacks the ability, but because it lacks the will. Bureaucracy protects itself before it protects those who depend on it. If Earth wishes to survive, it must prepare to do so largely on its own. Kaylin absorbed the words slowly, feeling the weight of them settle into her chest like stone. You're saying we're alone in this. I am saying you are not entirely without allies, Oren corrected gently, but you should not expect the Council itself to be among them. There are smaller worlds, ones who have faced similar dismissal, who may be willing to share what knowledge they have gathered through hard experience. I would encourage you to seek them once you return home, rather than waiting for a body that moves slower than the very threat it claims to monitor. Kaylin studied the small, weary figure before her, recognizing in his tired eyes the same frustration she now carried in her own chest. Thank you, Oren, for your honesty, if nothing else. Honesty is the least I can offer, Oren replied. I only hope your world fares better than mine did. Before Kaylin departed the station, Oren led her through a narrow corridor toward a small observation deck, overlooking a distant cluster of stars. The room was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of the galaxy stretching endlessly beyond the viewport. I wanted to show you something, Oren said, gesturing toward a data panel embedded in the wall. With a careful motion of his hand, he activated a recorded image, one showing a green and blue world not unlike Earth, its surface marked by winding rivers and wide open plains. This was my homeworld, before the Void Reach reached its outer colonies. I keep this image with me always, so I never forget what waiting cost us. Kaylin studied the image in silence, feeling the weight of Oren's quiet grief settle over her like a heavy blanket. It's beautiful, she said softly. It still is, Oren replied. We saved most of it, though not without cost. My point in showing you this is not to frighten you further, Ambassador. It is to remind you that survival is possible, even against overwhelming odds, provided your people act with clear purpose, rather than waiting for a rescue that may never arrive in time. What can you tell me about how you survived? Kaylin asked. Anything at all might help us. Oren considered the question carefully before answering. The Void Reach does not think the way individual creatures think. It moves as a single mind spread across countless smaller parts, coordinated through a form of resonance we still do not fully understand. Our scientists discovered that disrupting small sections of that resonance created confusion within the wider swarm, though our technology was never advanced enough to disrupt it on a scale large enough to stop it entirely. We simply bought ourselves enough time to retreat and rebuild. Kaylin absorbed every word carefully, already imagining how such information might combine with what Elena had discovered within the beacon's design. That might be exactly what we need, she said. Thank you, Oren, truly. Do not thank me yet, Oren replied, his wide eyes reflecting the distant starlight beyond the viewport. Thank me, if your world survives to tell its own story one day. Until then, focus only on preparing, and trust less in promises made by those who have never once faced the darkness themselves. With those final words settling heavily in her mind, Kaylin made her way back toward the vessel that would carry her home, carrying with her not the help she had hoped to find, but something perhaps more valuable in the long run, a clear understanding of exactly what humanity would need to survive on its own terms. The journey back to Earth felt longer than the journey out, though the distance remained the same. Kaylin spent much of it reviewing her notes, drafting reports, and trying to find some way to frame the Council's response that would not sound as devastating as it truly was. But when she finally stood before the Terran Unity Assembly once more, delivering her account of the meeting, she chose honesty over comfort. They know about the threat, she told the assembled leaders, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber back on Earth. They've known for generations, and they've chosen procedure over protection. If we wait for their help, we may not survive long enough to receive it. The room fell into stunned silence, the same heavy quiet that had filled the council chamber days earlier. Elena Voss, seated near the back of the assembly as an advisor, felt her chest tighten as Kaylin's words settled over the room. She had feared this outcome from the very beginning, ever since she first read the hollow, careful tone of the council's initial response. A representative from the assembly finally broke the silence. Then what do you propose we do? Kaylin straightened, drawing on whatever strength remained after days of exhaustion and disappointment. We stop waiting for permission to survive. We build what we need ourselves, using everything we've learned from the beacon's technology, and everything Earth has ever created on its own. If the galaxy won't protect us, then we protect ourselves. Across the room, murmurs of uncertainty mixed with quiet determination. Elena rose slowly from her seat, her voice steady despite the fear still coiled tightly in her chest. "I've spent months studying the beacon's design," she said. "There are principles within it we haven't fully explored yet, ways to disrupt coordinated movement patterns, similar to what the Void Reach displays in the data we've gathered. If we combine that knowledge with our own resources, we may be able to build something the Council never considered, simply because they've never been desperate enough to try." Kalen looked at her with something close to relief. "Then let's begin." For the first time in recorded history, the nations of Earth set aside old rivalries, not out of forced agreement, but out of necessity, born from shared fear and shared hope. Resources once spent on competition were redirected toward a single, unified purpose. Factories that once built separate technologies for separate nations now work together under one coordinated effort. It was not perfect, and disagreements still surfaced often, but for the first time, humanity moved with a single heartbeat, driven by the knowledge that the darkness spreading across the stars did not care about borders or old grudges. Kalen stood before the assembly once more as the meeting drew to a close, watching the determination settle across the faces of leaders who had spent years arguing over far smaller matters. "The Council ignored our warning," she said quietly, almost to herself, "but they underestimated something far more important. They forgot what desperation can build, when a people refuse to simply wait for their own ending." Outside, beneath a sky that still looked peaceful and undisturbed, the countdown toward humanity's next chapter had already begun, unseen by anyone yet felt by everyone, who understood just how much now depended on what they built in the time they had left. The laboratory beneath the Unity Research Complex hummed with a constant, restless energy, day and night, as though the building itself refused to sleep until its work was finished. Elena Voss had not left the facility in 3 days, surviving on short naps taken in a chair pushed into the corner of her office, and meals she barely remembered eating. Around her, a team of engineers, physicists, and programmers worked in shifts, chasing a single goal that had once seemed impossible and now felt like the only thing standing between Earth and destruction. At the center of their efforts stood a device unlike anything humanity had built before, a compact resonance emitter designed to mimic the disruption patterns Oren Vale had described. Elena had spent weeks studying the beacon's internal architecture, cross-referencing its energy signatures with the fragments of knowledge gathered from Kalen's meeting with the small, gray-furred representative. Slowly, piece by piece, theory had become blueprint, and blueprint had become something close to reality. "Run the simulation again," Elena said, rubbing her tired eyes as she leaned over a console beside a young engineer named Priya Malhotra. Priya's fingers moved quickly across the controls, activating a holographic model of a swarm formation drifting across the display, hundreds of small particles moving in eerie, synchronized patterns. "Emitting resonance pulse now," Priya said. The particles on the screen wavered, their formation breaking apart into confused, scattered movement, colliding briefly, before attempting to regroup. It was working, at least in simulation, though translating that success into a functioning weapon capable of operating at full scale remained a challenge that had cost them countless sleepless nights. "That's the 4th successful simulation this week," Priya said, unable to hide the excitement creeping into her voice. "If we can scale this up, we might actually stand a chance." Elena allowed herself a rare, tired smile.
"Might isn't good enough. We need certainty, or as close to it as we can get, before the Void Reach arrives."
Across the facility, Kalen Ruiz moved between meetings with a schedule that left little room for rest of her own. She had returned from her journey to the Council weeks earlier, carrying with her both disappointment and determination in equal measure, and had spent every day since working to hold together an alliance of nations that history had taught the world could barely agree on anything at all. Yet somehow, driven by the shared understanding that failure meant something far worse than embarrassment, the Terran Unity Assembly had held firm. She sat now, across from a broad-shouldered man named Julian Okafor, commander of Earth's newly formed Unified Defense Fleet, a position that had not existed a year earlier, and now carried more weight than any military rank in human history. "Give me numbers," Kalen said, sliding a datapad across the table toward him. Julian exhaled slowly before answering. "We've completed construction on 11 vessels so far, with 14 more currently in production. Training programs are running around the clock, pulling pilots from every corner of the globe, though most of them have far less experience than I'd like. We're building an entire military force from nothing in under a year, Ambassador. There are limits to how fast that can happen, no matter how much urgency we feel." "We don't have the luxury of ideal circumstances," Kalen replied. "How soon before those pilots are combat ready?" "Soon enough to matter, I hope," Julian said, though his tone carried the weight of a man who understood exactly how thin the margin for error had become. "But readiness on paper and readiness in the moment of true crisis are very different things. I've seen trained soldiers freeze the first time they face real danger. I can only imagine how these young pilots will react the first time they see something that isn't from our world bearing down on them." Kalen studied him carefully. "Do you believe in what we're building here, Commander?" Julian considered the question for a long moment before answering honestly. "I believe we don't have another choice. Whether that counts as belief, I suppose we'll find out together." Meanwhile, far from the tense meetings and late-night laboratories, training grounds stretched across converted airfields on every continent, where newly recruited pilots pushed themselves through exercises designed to prepare them for a battle none of them could fully imagine. Among them was a young woman named Mira Okonjo, barely 23 years old, who had left behind a promising career as a commercial pilot the moment the call for volunteers had gone out. She sat now inside the cockpit of a training simulator, sweat beading along her forehead as she guided a simulated craft through a chaotic field of obstacles designed to mimic the unpredictable movement patterns described in Oren's warnings. Beside her simulator, an instructor named Felix Adebayo watched the readings carefully, his expression unreadable. "You're overcorrecting," Felix said through the comm line. "The swarm doesn't move like a normal target. Stop trying to predict a straight line and start reading the pattern as a whole." Mira gritted her teeth, adjusting her controls, watching the scattered points on her display shift direction again without warning. "It's like trying to predict water," she muttered. "Then stop fighting the water," Felix replied. "Learn to move with it instead." After another hour of grueling simulation, Mira finally emerged from the cockpit, her flight suit soaked through with sweat, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. Felix approached her, offering a rare, small smile of approval. "Better," he said simply. "You're starting to understand it." "I don't know if understanding it will be enough when it's real," Mira admitted quietly. Felix's expression softened slightly. "None of us know that yet. But every hour you spend here is an hour that might save your life later, and the lives of everyone counting on you. That has to be enough for now." Back at the research facility, tensions rose as testing moved from simulation into physical trials. Elena stood inside a secured testing chamber alongside her team, watching nervously as engineers activated a scaled-down version of the resonance emitter for the first time outside of controlled digital models. The device hummed to life, emitting a low-frequency pulse that rippled visibly through a specialized sensor field designed to mimic swarm behavior on a small scale. For a tense moment, nothing happened, and Elena's stomach twisted with dread. Then, gradually, the sensor field began to destabilize, exactly as predicted, confirming that the theoretical models translated successfully into physical reality. A cheer broke out among the assembled engineers, though Elena remained focused, already thinking ahead to the next challenge. "This is a small victory," she said, raising her voice above the celebration. "We still need to scale this up by a factor of several hundred before it can affect a swarm of the size described in the Council's records. We don't have room to celebrate yet." Priya, standing beside her, allowed a brief smile despite the reminder. "Small victories still count, Dr. Voss. Even scientists need a moment to breathe sometimes." Elena managed a tired laugh, the first genuine laugh she had allowed herself in weeks. "Fair enough. One moment." Then back to work. As months passed, Earth's unified effort grew steadily stronger, though not without setbacks. A prototype vessel suffered a critical malfunction during testing, resulting in injuries to 2 crew members and a temporary halt in production while safety protocols were reviewed and improved. Disagreements between nations occasionally threatened to unravel the fragile cooperation holding the entire effort together, particularly when resource shortages forced difficult decisions about which projects received priority funding. During one especially tense assembly meeting, a representative from a smaller nation stood to voice frustration that had clearly been building for weeks. "We are being asked to sacrifice resources meant for our own people's basic needs, all based on a threat some of us have never even seen directly. How can we justify this to those we represent?" Kaylin listened carefully before responding, choosing her words with the same care she had used when addressing the council itself. "I understand the fear behind that question, but I've stood before beings who watched entire star systems disappear and spoke about it with less concern than we might show discussing a delayed shipment. The threat is real, even if we haven't seen it with our own eyes yet. And if we wait until we do see it, it will already be too late to prepare." Her words did not erase every doubt in the room, but they were enough, combined with mounting evidence gathered from ongoing observation of the Void Reach's slow approach, to hold the fragile alliance together for another difficult stretch of time. Elena's team continued refining the resonance weapon late into the following months, scaling up its power output while working to solve an unexpected problem, a feedback effect that threatened to damage the very ships meant to carry the technology into battle. Nights blurred into days as failures piled up alongside small, hard-won breakthroughs, each one bringing them closer to a solution that always seemed to remain just out of reach. It was Priya, exhausted and running on little more than determination, who finally identified the answer during a particularly late testing session, discovering that adjusting the emitter's frequency, in short, alternating bursts rather than a single continuous pulse, eliminated the dangerous feedback entirely. "That's it," she said, staring at the readings in stunned disbelief. "Elena, that's it. It works." Elena rushed to the console, reviewing the data herself, her exhausted mind slowly catching up to what her eyes were telling her. "You're right," she whispered, relief flooding through her exhausted body. "Priya, you brilliant, wonderful person, you found it." Word of the breakthrough spread quickly through the facility, offering a much-needed boost of morale to a team that had spent months pushing through exhaustion and doubt. Julian Okafor, informed of the development during a routine briefing, allowed himself a rare moment of genuine hope as he reviewed the updated specifications alongside his senior officers. "If this works at full scale," he said, studying the data carefully, "we might actually have something the Void Reach has never encountered before." Kaylin, present for the briefing, felt a similar cautious optimism settle over her for the first time since her disappointing meeting with the council months earlier. "Then let's make sure it does work," she said, "because we may not get a second chance to test it properly once the real fight begins." Not every challenge Earth faced during this period came from the stars. As the months wore on, cracks began to appear closer to home, born from fear, exhaustion, and the natural human tendency to look for someone to blame when the pressure grew too great. A financial analyst named Grace Bellamy, working within the Assembly's Resource Division, discovered irregularities in how funding had been distributed among competing research teams, sparking a dispute that threatened to undo months of fragile cooperation. "3 nations have quietly redirected funding toward independent defense projects," Grace explained during an emergency session with Kaylin and several senior Assembly members. "They claim they're hedging against the possibility that the unified effort fails, but if this continues, we'll fracture the very cooperation that gives us any chance at all." Kaylin felt exhaustion settle deeper into her bones as she absorbed the news. Months of careful diplomacy, of convincing proud, independent nations to set aside old grievances, now threatened to unravel over fear, rather than any true failure of the project itself. "Set up meetings with each of those governments," she said. "I'll speak with them personally if I have to." Over the following week, Kaylin traveled between continents with barely enough rest to keep herself functioning, meeting with officials who had grown increasingly nervous as the true scale of the threat settled into public consciousness. In each meeting, she carried the same message, delivered with the same quiet, unwavering conviction that had first moved the Terran Unity Assembly to action. "I understand the fear driving these decisions," she told one particularly resistant delegation, "but dividing our resources now, at the moment we're closest to a genuine breakthrough, doesn't protect anyone. It only weakens the one advantage we have left, the fact that for the first time in our history, we're facing a threat together rather than apart. Slowly, one government at a time, the fractures began to heal, though not without lingering tension that would occasionally resurface in the months ahead. Grace's careful oversight of shared resources helped rebuild trust between nations wary of feeling shortchanged, ensuring that funding flowed fairly toward whichever projects showed the most promise, regardless of which country had originally proposed them. Meanwhile, deep within the research facility, Elena faced her own quiet crisis of confidence. Despite the breakthrough Priya had discovered, scaling the resonance emitter to a size capable of affecting an entire swarm formation introduced new complications nobody had fully anticipated. Power requirements exceeded what their current vessels could sustain for more than a few seconds at a time, far too short a window to disrupt a threat as vast as the one described in the Council's own archives. Late one night, working alone after her team had finally been convinced to rest, Elena stared at the same equations she had reviewed 100 times before, searching for a solution that continued to elude her. Frustration mounted until, in a moment of quiet desperation, she found herself speaking aloud to the empty lab, as though the beacon itself might somehow answer her. "There has to be something we're missing," she muttered, scrolling back through the original beacon data for what felt like the 1,000th time. "Whoever built this wanted us to succeed. They wouldn't have left us without enough to finish the job." It was in reviewing the beacon's earliest transmitted fragments, the ones she had originally dismissed as decorative or symbolic, rather than functional, that she noticed something she had overlooked before. Hidden within what she had assumed was simply artistic border patterns surrounding the star map lay a secondary layer of data, compressed and easily missed unless specifically searched for. When decoded, it revealed a power distribution schematic entirely different from anything Earth's engineers had considered, one that used the vessel's own hull structure as a secondary energy conduit, rather than relying solely on internal power cores. Elena's hands trembled as the implications settled over her. She called Priya immediately, waking her from a rare, much-needed sleep, but Priya answered without hesitation, the moment she heard the excitement, barely contained in Elena's voice. "I think I found it," Elena said. "I think I know how to solve the power problem." Within days, engineering teams across the facility began implementing the newly discovered schematic, adapting ship designs already well underway to incorporate the hull-based energy distribution system hidden within the beacon's data. The process required significant modification to vessels already in production, causing frustrated groans among construction teams who had hoped their work was nearly finished. But as testing confirmed that the new system successfully extended the resonance emitter's operational window from mere seconds to several critical minutes, even the most exhausted engineers recognized the necessity of the added effort. Julian Okafor, reviewing the updated capabilities alongside his officers, felt something close to genuine confidence settle over him for the first time since accepting his impossible position months earlier. "This changes things considerably," he said, studying the revised specifications. "If we can sustain disruption for several minutes rather than mere seconds, we might actually have enough time to break a swarm's coordination entirely, rather than simply delaying it." "That assumes the swarm behaves exactly as Orenvale described," Kaelin cautioned, though hope had crept into her voice as well despite her natural caution. "We won't know for certain until we face it directly." "Then we'd better make sure we're ready for whatever we find," Julian replied. As the final months before the Void Reach's projected arrival ticked steadily away, Earth's unified fleet grew from a handful of hastily constructed vessels into a genuine defensive force, its pilots trained through exhausting repetition until swarm patterns became second nature rather than confusing chaos. Mira Okonjo, once uncertain and overwhelmed during her earliest simulations, now moved through advanced training exercises with a confidence that surprised even her instructors. "You've come a long way," Felix told her one evening, as the training grounds emptied beneath a darkening sky. Mira wiped sweat from her forehead, looking out toward the horizon where stars had just begun appearing overhead. "I still don't know if I'm ready for the real thing." "None of us are," Felix admitted honestly, "but readiness isn't really about feeling prepared. It's about showing up anyway, even when you're afraid, and doing what needs to be done regardless." Mira nodded slowly. absorbing his words as she looked up at the darkening sky, wondering how much time remained before that same sky carried something far more dangerous than stars. Somewhere far beyond human sight, the Void Reach continued its slow, relentless advance, unaware and uncaring of the desperate, determined effort now rising to meet it, an effort built not from advanced knowledge or ancient wisdom, but from something far simpler and, in its own way, far more powerful, the unwillingness of an entire species to quietly accept the fate a distant council had judged unworthy of urgent concern. The first sign that everything was about to change arrived not as an alarm, but as a silence. Deep space sensors positioned at the edge of the solar system, the same network Elena had helped design during the earliest days of preparation, suddenly stopped receiving background static from a region they had monitored closely for months. Julian Okafor stood in the command center aboard the lead vessel, a ship named Horizon, watching as the silence spread across every screen like a held breath. "Confirm sensor status," he said, his voice steady despite the tension gripping the room. "Sensors are fully operational, Commander," replied a young officer named Tobias Lindgren, his fingers moving quickly across his console. "The silence isn't a malfunction. It's the Void Reach. It's absorbing the background radiation as it approaches, exactly like the Council's older records predicted." Julian felt his chest tighten, though he kept his expression carefully neutral for the sake of the crew watching him. "Time until visual range?" "6 hours, Commander, maybe less." Word spread quickly through the fleet, then back to Earth itself, where Kaylin Ruiz stood before the Terran Unity Assembly, one final time before the battle that would decide humanity's future. She did not offer a lengthy speech, understanding that words meant little in the face of what was coming. Instead, she simply looked out at the gathered leaders, many of whom had become genuine allies over the past difficult year, and spoke with quiet, unwavering conviction. "Everything we've built has led to this moment," she said. "Whatever happens next, remember that we did not wait to be saved. We stood up on our own." Aboard Horizon, Elena Voss made her way through the ship's corridors toward the engineering deck, where the newly installed resonance array waited, fully powered and ready for its first true test. She found Priya Malhotra already there, running final diagnostics with a focus so intense she barely noticed Elena's arrival. "Everything checks out," Priya said without looking up. "Power distribution stable. Emitter array fully charged. We're as ready as we're going to be." Elena placed a steadying hand on Priya's shoulder. "You've done incredible work getting us here." "We've done incredible work," Priya corrected, finally looking up with a tired but determined smile. "Let's make sure it counts for something." Throughout the fleet, pilots settled into their vessels, running final checks with hands that trembled slightly despite months of rigorous training. Mira Okonjo sat inside her assigned fighter, a sleek vessel named Falcon 6, taking slow, steady breaths as she waited for the order to launch. Beside her, through the comm line, Felix Adebayo's calm voice offered one final piece of guidance before the battle began. "Remember your training," he said. "Read the pattern. Move with it, not against it, and trust the people flying beside you." "I trust them," Mira replied quietly. "I just hope it's enough." "It will have to be," Felix said. "Good luck out there." The Void Reach appeared on visual sensors precisely when predicted, a vast, dark mass, stretching across the void like a living shadow, composed of countless smaller elements, moving in eerie, synchronized coordination. Even through the protective distance of a view screen, its scale defied easy comprehension, dwarfing the assembled human fleet many times over. Julian's voice carried steadily across every ship's comm system. "All vessels, hold formation. Wait for the signal before engaging the resonance array. We only get one real chance to disrupt their coordination before they adapt to our tactics." The fleet held position as the Void Reach continued its slow, relentless advance, close enough now that individual components within the swarm became visible, twisting and shifting in patterns that seemed to defy any predictable logic. Elena watched from engineering, her hand hovering over the activation controls, waiting for Julian's order with a tension so thick it felt almost physical. "Steady," Julian said, watching the swarm's approach with careful, measured patience. "Steady." The swarm surged forward suddenly, closing the remaining distance far faster than anyone had anticipated, and Julian's voice cut sharply through the tension gripping the fleet. Activate resonance array, now. Elena's hands moved instantly, engaging the system Priya had worked so hard to perfect. Across the fleet, similar arrays activated in careful coordination, sending overlapping pulses of disruptive energy directly into the heart of the approaching swarm. For a breathless moment, nothing appeared to change, and Elena's stomach twisted with dread as she watched the readings on her console. Then, gradually, the swarm's perfect coordination began to falter. Elements that had moved in eerie unison suddenly scattered, colliding awkwardly with one another, as the resonance pulses disrupted whatever silent communication had guided their movements. A cheer rose briefly across the comm channels, before Julian's firm voice cut through the celebration. This isn't over. Fighters, engage secondary defense pattern. Keep them scattered while the array maintains disruption. Mira guided Falcon 6 into the chaos, alongside dozens of other fighters, weaving through the disoriented swarm with the same careful, practiced movements she had spent months perfecting during training. The swarm, though disrupted, remained dangerous, individual elements lashing out unpredictably as they struggled against the confusion imposed upon them. Mira's hands moved instinctively, guiding her craft through narrow gaps between shifting formations, her training finally translating from simulation into something real. Formation holding, she reported, her voice tight with concentration. They're not regrouping as fast as they were before. Aboard Horizon, Julian watched the unfolding battle with cautious hope, aware that the true test still lay ahead. The resonance array, though effective, drew heavily on the fleet's power reserves, and Elena's earlier warning echoed clearly in his mind. They would only maintain full disruption for a limited window, before power levels dropped too low to sustain the effect. "Elena," he said through the comm line. "Status on the array?" "Holding steady," Elena replied, though tension colored her voice clearly. "But we're burning through reserves faster than projected. I'd estimate 4 more minutes at full output before we need to scale back." "Understood," Julian replied. "Fleet, press the advantage. We need to inflict as much damage as possible before that window closes." The battle raged on, chaotic and tense, though remarkably free of the widespread destruction many had feared when the Void Reach first appeared on their sensors. The resonance array's disruption kept the swarm largely disorganized, allowing Earth's fighters to weaken its coordinated elements steadily, without facing the full, devastating force the Void Reach had unleashed upon other worlds in the past. Just as Elena's power reserves began dropping toward critical levels, a new set of signals appeared on long-range sensors, unexpected and unfamiliar. Tobias Lindgren's voice carried a note of confusion mixed with cautious hope as he reported the readings to Julian. "Commander, we're picking up additional vessels approaching from the outer system. They're not part of our fleet." Julian's chest tightened with uncertainty. "Identify them." A tense moment passed before Tobias responded, his voice now carrying clear astonishment. "Sir, their signal signatures match records from smaller Council-affiliated worlds. I'm reading at least a dozen vessels, all converging on our position." Kaylin, monitoring the battle from Earth's command center, felt her breath catch as she processed the unexpected development. Word of Earth's stand against the Void Reach had apparently spread beyond the Council's formal channels, reaching smaller worlds who understood all too well the danger of facing the swarm without meaningful support. Among the arriving vessels was a modest, weathered ship bearing markings Kaylin recognized instantly from her earlier meeting on Threnvora. She opened a direct channel, her voice carrying clearly across the distance despite the tension of the ongoing battle. "This is Ambassador Ruiz of Earth. Please identify yourselves." A familiar, gentle voice responded almost immediately. "Ambassador Ruiz, this is Oren Vale. Word reached our system of Earth's stand against the Void Reach. We could not, in good conscience, remain idle while another world faced what mine once faced alone." Relief and gratitude flooded through Kaylin so suddenly that she found herself momentarily unable to speak. "Oren, your help couldn't have arrived at a better moment. Thank you." "Save your thanks for after the battle," Oren replied. "For now, let us fight together." The arrival of additional vessels provided exactly the boost Earth's fleet needed, as power reserves continued dwindling. Combined resonance emitters from the newly arrived ships extended the disruption's effective window significantly longer than Earth's fleet alone could have sustained, giving fighters like Mira the crucial extra time needed to press their advantage against the faltering swarm. "Their coordination is completely breaking down," Mira reported, weaving Falcon 6 through the increasingly chaotic remnants of what had once been a terrifyingly organized threat. "I don't think they know how to function like this." Julian watched the battle's tide shift decisively in their favor, allowing himself, for the first time, genuine confidence that victory remained within reach. "Continue the assault. Don't let up until the swarm's remaining elements retreat or are fully neutralized." Over the following hour, what remained of the Void Reach's coordinated mass fractured further, individual elements scattering in confused, directionless patterns, until whatever drove their original purpose seemed to collapse entirely. Slowly, the remaining fragments began withdrawing, retreating back toward the depths of space from which they had come, leaving Earth's battered but victorious fleet drifting amid the wreckage of a battle few had truly believed they would survive. Aboard Horizon, cheers erupted across every deck as Julian confirmed the swarm's retreat, though exhaustion tempered the celebration for those who understood how narrow their victory had truly been. Elena sank into a chair within engineering, her hands finally steady now that the tension of battle had passed, tears mixing with relieved laughter as Priya embraced her tightly. "We did it," Priya said, her voice thick with emotion. "Elena, we actually did it." "We did it together," Elena replied, gesturing toward the newly arrived Allied vessels visible through a nearby viewport. "All of us." Mira guided Falcon 6 back toward the fleet's temporary staging area, her hands finally trembling now that immediate danger had passed, adrenaline slowly giving way to overwhelming relief. Felix's voice greeted her warmly through the comm line as she completed her final approach. "Nice flying out there," he said. "I told you the training would be enough." "Barely," Mira replied, laughing despite her exhaustion. "But I'll take barely enough over not enough any day." Kaylin stood in Earth's command center, watching updates arrive steadily confirming the Void Reach's continued retreat, her exhaustion mixing with a quiet, profound sense of accomplishment. Around her, leaders who had spent the past year navigating fear, doubt, and difficult sacrifice now shared in a moment of genuine, hard-earned relief. "Get me a channel to Oren Vale," she said finally, wanting to properly thank the ally whose earlier warning had shaped so much of Earth's preparation. When the connection opened, she found herself struggling briefly to find adequate words for the gratitude filling her chest. "Oren, I don't know how to properly thank you and your people for what you did today." "You do not need to thank us, Ambassador," Oren replied warmly. "We simply did what should have been done for us, and for every world the Council has failed over the years. Perhaps, together, we can ensure fewer worlds face that same failure in the future." Kaylin felt something settle firmly within her chest, a quiet resolve that had been building steadily since her disappointing first meeting with the Council months earlier. "I intend to make certain of exactly that, Oren. This victory shouldn't belong only to Earth. It should mean something for every world the Council has been willing to overlook." In the days following the battle, the fleet remained stationed near the outer system, conducting careful surveys of the drifting wreckage left behind by the shattered swarm. Elena led a small team through the delicate process of studying the remains, eager to understand more about the very threat that had nearly overwhelmed them, while also cautious of any lingering danger the scattered fragments might still pose. "These readings are unlike anything in our existing records," she said, reviewing data gathered from a particularly large fragment recovered by one of the Allied vessels. "Whatever gave the swarm its coordination clearly wasn't purely mechanical. There's an organic component here we hadn't accounted for." Priya leaned over the console beside her, equally fascinated despite her exhaustion. "Do you think that's why the resonance disruption worked so well? If part of its coordination relied on something closer to biological signaling, our emitters might have interfered with it more effectively than anyone expected." "It's possible," Elena said. "Whatever the answer turns out to be, this data alone could reshape our understanding of the threat for years to come. Assuming, of course, this is truly the last we see of it." Aboard a nearby Allied vessel, Oren Vale reviewed similar findings alongside his own small crew, occasionally exchanging notes with Elena's team through an open communication channel that had remained active since the battle's end. The exchange of knowledge between the two crews felt, to Elena, like the beginning of something far larger than a simple alliance forged in crisis, a genuine partnership built on shared experience and mutual respect, rather than formal council procedure. Back on Earth, celebrations spread across every continent as news of the fleet's victory reached the public. Streets filled with people who had spent months living under the quiet, constant weight of an uncertain future, now finally allowed a moment of genuine relief and pride. Kaylin watched footage of the celebrations from her office window, feeling a complicated mixture of emotions settle over her. Pride and relief mingled with an awareness that the true work ahead had only just begun. Julian Okafor, addressing his exhausted crew aboard Horizon before the fleet's eventual return home, chose his words carefully, aware of how much the moment meant to those who had risked everything for a victory that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. "What we accomplished today wasn't just a battle won," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the ship's assembled crew. "It was proof that we don't need permission to protect what matters to us. We built this fleet from nothing, in less time than anyone believed possible, and we stood our ground against a threat that has erased entire star systems. Whatever comes next, remember what we proved here today." Mira, standing among her fellow pilots as Julian spoke, felt a swell of pride mixed with quiet disbelief at everything they had accomplished together. Felix, standing beside her, offered a small, knowing smile. "Still think barely enough wasn't enough?" he asked. Mira laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, I think barely enough turned out to be exactly enough, this time." As the fleet finally began its journey back toward Earth, escorted by their newly found allies, Elena took a quiet moment alone in engineering, watching the stars drift past the viewport in peaceful, undisturbed silence, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She thought back to the night the alarm had first sounded in the monitoring station, to the fear and uncertainty that had followed in the months since, and felt a quiet, grateful pride settle over her at how far they had all come. 6 months after the battle at the edge of the solar system, Kaylin Ruiz found herself once again standing within the pale, curved chamber of the Galactic Council, though this time the room felt entirely different from her first visit. Word of Earth's victory against the Void Reach had spread far beyond the small circle of allied worlds who had come to their aid, reaching even the most insulated corners of Council territory, carried by traders, travelers, and the same beacon network that had first warned humanity of the coming threat. This time, when Kaylin entered the chamber, the murmurs that greeted her carried a different tone entirely, curiosity mixed with something closer to respect than the polite dismissal she had faced during her first audience. The blue-skinned representative who had spoken first during that earlier meeting rose slightly from his seat as she approached the central platform, a small gesture that had not occurred during her previous visit. "Ambassador Ruiz," he said, his tone noticeably warmer than before. "The Council welcomes your return and extends its congratulations on Earth's remarkable victory against a threat that has troubled this region for generations." Kaylin studied him carefully, recognizing the shift in tone for exactly what it was, respect earned through demonstrated strength rather than freely given consideration. "Thank you," she said evenly, "though I confess, I find myself curious how the Council views a victory achieved entirely without its support." A ripple of uncomfortable silence spread through the chamber, though the blue-skinned representative recovered smoothly, his expression carefully composed. "The Council's processes exist to ensure measured, careful decision-making across countless worlds with countless competing needs. We acknowledge that in this instance, our timeline did not align with the urgency Earth's situation required." "With respect," Kaylin replied, choosing her words carefully. "It wasn't only my world's situation. Orin Vale's people faced the same threat years before we did, and received the same careful, measured response. How many other worlds have faced similar dismissal, simply because their timeline for danger didn't match your timeline for procedure?" The smaller, plated representative who had spoken so coldly during Kaylin's first visit shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "The Council's records do show a pattern of similar requests over the past several generations, yes. Most resulted in significant losses for the requesting worlds before assistance, if granted at all, arrived. Then perhaps," Kaylin said, "this is an opportunity to reconsider whether that pattern should continue." A new voice entered the conversation, one Kaylin recognized immediately with quiet relief. Orin Vale rose from his seat near the back of the chamber, no longer content to remain silent as he had during their first meeting together. if I may speak, honored council members. My world stood alongside Earth during the recent battle, not out of formal obligation, but because we understood exactly what waiting for council approval would have cost them. I believe many smaller worlds represented in this chamber share that same understanding, born from similar experience. Murmurs spread through the assembled representatives, several exchanging quiet glances that suggested Oren's words had struck a chord far wider than Kalen had anticipated. A representative Kalen did not recognize, small and covered in shimmering scales, rose from a seat near the chamber's edge. My world too has faced similar delays when requesting council assistance, the representative said. Perhaps it is time this body examined not only Earth's unusual success, but the broader pattern that made such desperate self-reliance necessary in the first place. Over the following hours, what began as Kalen's formal address evolved into something far larger, a genuine debate among council representatives about the institution's fundamental approach to smaller, developing worlds. Kalen listened carefully as voices long silenced by procedural weight finally found room to speak, some cautious, others openly critical, all united by shared frustration that had apparently simmered beneath the council's careful surface for generations. Finally, near the session's end, the blue-skinned representative addressed Kalen directly once more, his earlier careful composure now tempered by something that looked almost like genuine reflection. Ambassador Ruiz, it seems your world's victory has prompted considerations this council has avoided for far too long. What would Earth propose, if given the opportunity to reshape how this body responds to emerging threats? Kalen had considered this exact question during the long journey back to Threnvora, discussing it at length with Elena, Julian, and the wider Terran Unity Assembly before her departure. She answered now with the same clear, measured confidence that had carried her through every difficult negotiation of the past year. A tiered response system, she said, one that allows verified, credible threats to receive expedited review, rather than forcing every world through the same lengthy procedure regardless of urgency. Additionally, a network of smaller worlds willing to offer mutual support during council review periods, formalized rather than left to chance, as it was for Earth. The chamber fell into thoughtful silence as representatives considered her proposal, some clearly skeptical, others nodding slowly in quiet agreement. The plated representative who had first denied Kalen's original request studied her carefully before speaking. Such changes would require significant restructuring of established protocol, she said. Protocol that has governed this council for longer than your world has existed, Ambassador. With respect, Kalen replied evenly. Protocol that fails the worlds it claims to protect deserves restructuring, regardless of how long it has existed. After extensive deliberation stretching across several additional sessions, the council reached a decision that, while not as sweeping as Kalen had hoped, represented genuine progress toward the change she had proposed. Earth was granted full council membership, an honor typically reserved for civilizations far older and more established, in recognition of both its demonstrated capability and the valuable resonance technology now offered freely to other worlds facing similar threats. Alongside this, the Council agreed to establish a formal review committee tasked with developing an expedited threat assessment process, with Oren Vale, at Kalen's specific request, appointed as its founding chair. When Kalen finally returned to Earth, carrying news of both achievements, she found herself welcomed not with the uncertain hope that had marked her first departure, but with genuine celebration befitting the accomplishment it represented. She stood once more before the Terran Unity Assembly, delivering her report with a quiet satisfaction that had replaced the exhausted determination of months earlier. We didn't just survive, she told the gathered leaders. We changed something far larger than ourselves. The council that once dismissed our warning now looks to Earth as an example of what's possible when a world refuses to simply accept being overlooked. Elena Voss, present in the assembly as both advisor and, increasingly, as a public figure whose work had become inseparable from Earth's survival, listened to Kalen's report with quiet pride. In the months since the battle, she had continued refining the resonance technology alongside Priya and their expanded research team, now sharing their findings openly with allied worlds through the very network Oren had helped establish. After the assembly session concluded, Elena found a quiet moment to speak privately with Kalen, the two women sharing a rare pause amid the ongoing whirlwind of their respective responsibilities. "Do you ever think back to that first night in the monitoring station?" Elena asked, "when none of us knew if anyone would even believe what we'd found." Kaylin smiled, the exhaustion of the past year finally beginning to ease from her expression. "Often. It's strange, isn't it? How something that terrified us so completely ended up bringing out the very best of what we're capable of." "I don't think it's strange at all," Elena replied thoughtfully. "I think we simply needed a reason significant enough to finally set aside everything that used to divide us." Before returning to her research, Elena had accompanied Kaylin partway through the diplomatic tour that followed the Council's decision, visiting several of the smaller allied worlds whose vessels had helped turn the tide during Earth's darkest hour. On one such visit, she stood beside Kaylin on a windswept plain beneath a violet-colored sky, greeted by representatives of a modest farming world that had lost nearly a quarter of its population to the Void Reach 2 generations earlier, long before Orin's people had faced the same threat. A weathered elder named Sella Thorne, leader of the small settlement, welcomed them with a warmth that surprised Elena, given everything the world had endured. "We watched the battle through shared transmissions," Sella explained, guiding them through fields recovering slowly from decades of hardship. "Our children have grown up believing the stars hold nothing but danger. Seeing your world stand and succeed, where ours once stood and suffered, has given many of us a hope we had nearly forgotten how to feel." Elena felt the weight of those words settle deeply within her, a reminder that Earth's victory carried meaning far beyond its own survival. "We couldn't have done it without allies like yours," she said honestly. "Your world's data, shared through Orin, helped shape the very technology that saved us." Sella smiled gently. "Then perhaps our losses were not entirely without purpose after all." The visit left a lasting impression on both Elena and Kaylin, reinforcing the importance of the review committee Orin now chaired, and strengthening their shared resolve to ensure that no world, however small or overlooked, would need to face such devastating losses again before receiving the support it deserved. Kaylin made certain that Sella's settlement received priority access to reconstruction resources shared through the growing Alliance network, a small but meaningful gesture toward repairing damage the Council's earlier inaction had allowed to occur. Back within the Council chamber several months later, the newly formed review committee presented its first formal proposal, outlining a structured process for expedited threat assessment that would ensure worlds facing credible, immediate danger received meaningful support long before their situation grew as dire as Earth's had once been. Orin Vale, standing before the assembled representatives with a confidence Elena had never witnessed during their earlier meetings, delivered the committee's findings with quiet, measured conviction. "This proposal will not prevent every future tragedy," Orin acknowledged honestly. "But it represents a genuine commitment to ensuring this council serves the worlds within its charge, rather than merely governing them from a comfortable distance. Sternz's example has shown us what becomes possible when desperate need meets genuine resolve. Let us ensure fewer worlds are forced to discover that lesson through suffering alone." The proposal passed with a majority Kaylin had not dared hope for during her earliest, most disheartening visit to the chamber, a clear signal that the council's culture, slow and resistant as it remained in many respects, had begun shifting towards something more responsive to the worlds it claimed to protect. Kaylin watched the vote conclude with quiet satisfaction, recognizing in that moment just how far both Earth and the wider council had traveled since her first, disappointing audience within these same walls. Months turned into a full year following the battle, and Earth's transformation continued steadily, both within its own borders and across its newly formed relationships throughout the wider galaxy. The Unified Defense Fleet, once a hastily assembled group of untested vessels, evolved into a respected and capable force, occasionally called upon to assist allied worlds facing threats of their own, always guided by the same principle that had shaped its original formation, that no world deserved to face danger entirely alone. Mira Okonjo, now a senior instructor training the next generation of pilots, often found herself sharing the same guidance Felix had once offered her during her earliest, most uncertain days of training. Standing before a new group of nervous recruits one bright morning, she recognized something familiar in their anxious expressions, the same fear and determination she remembered feeling herself, not so very long ago. "You're going to make mistakes," she told them honestly. You're going to feel like you're not ready, even after months of training. But readiness isn't really about feeling prepared. It's about showing up anyway, and doing what needs to be done, regardless of how afraid you feel. That's what got us through before, and it's what will carry you through whatever comes next. Felix, now serving as her senior advisor, rather than her instructor, watched from the back of the training room with quiet, proud satisfaction, recognizing his own words reflected back through someone who had once needed to hear them just as desperately. Grace Bellamy, whose careful oversight had helped hold together Earth's fragile early cooperation, continued her work within the Assembly's Resource Division, now focused on ensuring the technology and knowledge gained through Earth's victory reached allied worlds fairly and efficiently. Her quiet, steady diligence, often overlooked amid the more dramatic achievements of pilots and scientists, remained a crucial thread holding together the wider cooperative effort Earth now led among its growing circle of allies. Julian Okafor, still commanding the fleet he had built from nothing, found himself increasingly drawn into diplomatic matters alongside his military responsibilities, representing Earth's defense interests during ongoing discussions with the Council's newly formed review committee. Though he often joked that he had signed up to command ships, not attend meetings, few doubted the sincerity behind his continued dedication to ensuring Earth, and its allies, remained genuinely prepared for whatever challenges the future might bring. Elena, perhaps more than anyone, found her life reshaped most profoundly by everything that had unfolded since that first restless night in the monitoring station. The quiet, often dismissed scientist who once struggled to convince colleagues that humanity was not alone in the universe, now stood recognized across multiple worlds as a leading voice in resonance technology, her research directly responsible for saving countless lives, both on Earth and among the allied worlds, who now benefited from her discoveries. One evening, months after the Council's decision to grant Earth full membership, Elena found herself back in the same monitoring station where everything had first begun, though the room itself had changed considerably, upgraded with technology developed through the very research her discovery had inspired. Victor Hale, now serving as director of the expanded facility, joined her as she looked out over the quiet hum of active monitoring stations, each one now connected not only to Earth's own defense network, but to the wider alliance of worlds Kalen's diplomacy had helped forge. Strange, isn't it? Victor said, settling into the seat beside her. How much can change in just a few years? Elena nodded slowly, watching the steady blink of monitoring lights across the room, each one representing a connection to something far larger than the isolated, uncertain world she had once feared. Earth would remain forever. I used to think humanity's greatest weakness was how alone we were, she said quietly. How small and insignificant we must have looked to everyone else out there. But I think I finally understand it differently now. How so? Victor asked. Being overlooked forced us to become something we might never have become otherwise, Elena said. It forced us to set aside our differences, to build something remarkable out of pure necessity, and to prove, not just to the Council, but to ourselves, exactly what we're truly capable of when we choose to stand together, rather than wait to be rescued. Victor considered her words thoughtfully before responding. Do you think the Council will remember that lesson, now that Earth has proven itself? Elena allowed herself a small, knowing smile. I think it doesn't matter whether they remember it or not. We'll remember it, and that's enough to ensure we never find ourselves quite so unprepared again. Outside the monitoring station, beneath a sky no longer filled with quiet, unknowing peace, but with the steady, reassuring presence of an alliance built through shared struggle and hard-earned trust, Earth continued its steady journey forward, no longer a world waiting anxiously for permission to matter, but one that had proven, decisively and unforgettably, exactly what it meant to rise when everyone else expected it to simply fall. And somewhere among the stars, on a small, weathered vessel still bearing the marks of the battle it had helped win, Oren Vale looked out toward the distant, blue-tinted world he now considered a true friend, carrying with him a quiet, hopeful certainty that Earth's story, remarkable as it already was, had truly only just begun.